Well, who needed another rendition of the Joker? I know I didn't. I wasn't wanting to see the film. I was quite content to satisfy myself with the rendition played by Heath Ledger in the incredible movie The Dark Knight with Christian Bale as Batman. Admission, I'm a very big Batman fan, as my close friends know.
He is.
And I really wasn't too keen on seeing this film. But I did, especially given all of the surrounding controversy that it was going to induce young incels to commit shooting sprees, and that it was a kind of a call to violence in its own way, and that it was dangerously irresponsible. All sorts of quotes coming from the woke media that we were exposed to, including the military, who sent out a letter to its personnel stating, if you're going to go to movie theaters that weekend, be very careful and watchful. Well, what a load of nonsense, as we have come to realize. Because, in fact, Joker, far from being the irresponsible kind of advocacy of violence and instability that comes to be exemplified in the character of Joker, this kind of agent of chaos, the arch nemesis of Batman, this being that is psychotic and lives for his own personal satisfaction of killing and taking control of situations and of inflicting great suffering. This movie was actually quite surprisingly insightful on many levels. And on top of that, and we'll be getting into this in the show as well, it was made very artfully. So that's it for the intro. We can go in any number of directions, guys, I think, in describing this movie and what makes it good.
Well, right off, I want to just say that we'll probably be weaving in and out of spoiler territory for the show. So if you're worried about that kind of thing and you don't want anything spoiled, then probably watch the movie first and then come back and listen to our discussion, because we'll be discussing, well, like the whole movie and everything surrounding it, and taking it from a bunch of different angles. But to start out with, I want to comment a bit on this kind of negative media hype that was going on. Because like you said, judging by the press that it was getting, even from people that hadn't seen the movie, I expected something completely different, or at least until I started reading some other things and then finally seeing the movie. It was just totally and completely misrepresented. And the total hysteria that was surrounding the movie, knowing now what I do about the movie, makes me think that there is something else going on. Mm-hmm. Like, what is it about this movie that provoked such a hysterical reaction that was totally at odds with reality? Maybe we can deal with a few of the accusations, I guess you could call them. Like, first of all, that it's extremely violent. Well, now having seen the movie, there are some violent scenes. There's one particularly violent scene that isn't 5% as gory as any number of movies I've seen in the last 10 years, whether horror movies or war movies, that actually kind of not only depict like horrific acts of violence, but do it in such a way that it is either completely over the top or completely in your face, like just to show how gory you could be. Like that's everywhere, and it's on TV. Like it's on kind of the big channels like HBO or the ones you have to actually pay for. You get extreme violence in all of these shows and movies. This movie is relatively tame compared to that. Like I said, there are a few violent scenes. Most of the violence is, I think there's maybe three or four violent scenes in the whole movie, most involving gunshots. where you don't really see much. It's clear that someone got shot, and that's it. Some have some blood spatters, and then there's one particularly violent scene involving a stabbing. And even that, you don't actually see very much compared to, again, like a lot of the like horror movies that have come out in the last 5-10 years, even the last year. So that was completely blown out of proportion, the level of violence in the movie. And the movie itself isn't really about violence. Like the violence is something that like interjects itself at various important parts of the movie that are actually integral to the narrative of the movie, to the plot, and to the development. So that was odd. And then there's this whole idea about the movie inspiring violence as if it glorifies this violence first of all, and then that glory will then reflect itself in individuals susceptible that might idolize the Joker or something and see it as a good thing and wish to emulate it. But when you actually see the movie, like if that happens, then it would be at no fault of the filmmakers. Mm-hmm. It would be like someone, I mean, you could take any movie with violence and then say that. Just because they saw something violent, they were emulating it. When this movie in particular, anyone watching this movie who comes away with that message, there's got to be something wrong with them in the first place. And no one has done that. There hasn't been any violence in reaction to this movie so far. But when you actually watch the movie, I think the reason it's making people so uncomfortable is the same reason that people haven't been going out shooting people because of it. Because the way the movie is structured is, and like, I don't like, you know, I wouldn't say it has a message, but if there is a message to it, it is one that would actually, or that should actually make you repulsed by the violence,
right? And
probably like de-radicalize you if you have that particular kind of mentality, because the way I see the actual movie is, here's a presentation of exactly what almost exactly what the media are saying would happen to these potential viewers, but in the movie itself, here you have this character who is, let's say, a potential risk, a potential violent threat or risk, and that this character encountering certain things in his life and having his own mental illness problems and personality problems, then becomes violent, essentially becomes radicalized in a certain sense, and becomes this violent criminal. So that's what the media were saying was going to happen to actual people. But within the film, the character arc, the journey that this character goes through, is one that should leave you actually feeling repulsed by this journey. And it's like, oh wow, that's first of all, mm-hmm. it's a tragedy. It's almost like watching this, not true crime, but this descent into criminality that is actually disturbing to watch. And like, there is in the movie, really, if you're paying attention to the movie, there's no reason to adulate or mm-hmm. to admire this character. Like I said, essentially, you should have the opposite reaction. And I saw a few interviews with some of the filmmakers, including the co-writer and director Todd Phillips, where he was asked about this, about the kind of controversy of having this character that you might empathize with. Mm-hmm. And first of all, he pointed out that yeah, he empathizes with the character, and he's saying, well, I empathized with Scarface through the entire movie, so that, like, just as a kind of humorous look at himself. But he says that for people watching the movie, absolutely you should be empathizing with this Arthur Fleck character, and because that's in the movie. Like, Joker is this character, Arthur Fleck. Maybe we can give a little background for those who haven't seen the movie. But this character, he basically says you should empathize with him, but each person is going to have like a different point in the film where you're like, okay, where he kind of goes too far, where your perception of him switches, and you think, okay, at that point you're no longer feeling sorry for him. And like rooting him, rooting for him in the movie. You're like, okay, that's like, he's snapped, he's gone too far. Like, there should be a point in this film at which every relatively normal person has that reaction. And I think this comes back to the reason why I think that people, especially people more on the left, more on the liberal spectrum, are getting so uncomfortable with this movie. And I think this is the reason for their over-the-top reaction, is because in many ways, the character of Arthur Fleck, the character of the Joker, is one like with whom they should be empathizing. Mm-hmm. Ordinarily, they would be in a slightly different context. They would be cheering this guy on, and the very fact that the movie actually leads you on this journey to then see him as a horrible person, which he actually becomes. Mm-hmm. That is kind of shattering one of their own, or several of their own, assumptions about the nature of the world and reality itself, almost. And that is very uncomfortable because they want to root for this guy for various reasons, but they can't because he's presented as this kind of evil criminal.
And the reasons why you're a liberal, or anybody with a modicum of empathy would feel compelled or feel a natural inclination, that's a better way of saying it, towards empathizing with Arthur Fleck, is because he's clearly a kind of a person who's deeply sorrowful, deeply depressed, makes his living doing cheap gigs as a clown, is alone in the sense that he doesn't have a partner. He takes care of his mother in a kind of an incestuous fashion. He's economically disadvantaged. He's beaten up in one of the earlier scenes, just trying to do his job. So there are all of these things that would tug at the heartstrings. And like you said, Harrison, it's really the film is really asking the viewer to do some work here and to question just how far they're willing to identify or empathize or feel some kindred spirit with Arthur. And so to see this descent into psychosis and to learn how tenuous his grip on reality is as the narrative wears on, is to really begin to do some of your own work on and questioning on what it is you're seeing. And that's not what most people are used to. As wonderful as Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker was, and the writing and direction was in The Dark Knight, pretty much he's presented fait accompli as this the psychotic brilliant mass murderer criminal that we all kind of know of this character. Where this origin story is asking people to think on a troubled person with a criminal mind in a whole new context, I think.
Well, maybe one other thing about the media reaction before we get into some more of our thoughts. Like, Corey, I know you've read some reviews too, but one of the ones I read was about how this movie was essentially racist. And like, I don't know who wrote this article. It's really not that memorable, but he was basically saying how it really points out the problem of whiteness. And this reviewer's point was that, like, I don't even know how to summarize it. That really it showed the problems of white supremacy and how if Arthur was Arthur had to be white essentially, and this showed like somehow he managed to weave this narrative, like this analysis of the movie all around race, when there was nothing in the movie about that. Like did you read that one, Corey? Like,
no, the one that I read was a lot more subtle in how they depicted their racial concerns, and that was that the director was white, so the movie sucked.
Yeah, very subtle.
It's very subtle.
Well, but the thing is, like, if you watch the movie as itself, like I said, doesn't really have any statements one way or the other about racism. Like the character himself is depicted as like not a racist person. He's just a low class, like mentally ill white guy who happens to have a crush on his black neighbor, and that's I think as far as like the racial analysis goes. Like I think it's really well, just like all kind of like gender studies or the vast majority of gender studies and this kind of stuff. It's really reaching in its analysis. Like you have your set framework from which you're going to view anything, and then you just force fit anything that you're analyzing into that framework, as opposed to just looking at the movie in this case itself and saying, okay, well, what does the movie itself say? The movie itself isn't saying anything about like race one way or the other. It really is. And I think it's probably best to just like leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, just another element there is that, this guy is the Arthur Fleck, after he goes through his transmutation into the Joker. He is the hero for the left or whatever, for the oppressed and all those people who want to kill the rich and eat the rich. And so, I mean, that right there, that's a big slap in the face to all those people who want to eat the rich and kill the rich, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of it's a look in the mirror. This is a hero. This is somebody who, in the artist's imagination has, all of these concerns, similar concerns that you have, parrots your same ideas, but is fundamentally, like, clearly you're looking right into his soul, essentially. He's like a demonic, crazed, schizoid, creep, idiot, fool that, just a total creep. So, I mean, basically what it's interjecting there is some degree of separation, from some critical separation from your values to, just some, like you were saying, Alon, some work that you have to do to flesh out, like, are these values universally good? Just, regardless of the psyche of the person who espouses them, like what kind of values does somebody like this really hold? Are they really adhering to these? I mean, or is this just an attack by the white, power structure on our ideas? Or is there some, something really at its root very profound about that the movie says about the complexities of society and of mental illness? Like a number of reviews I've read have said that the movie has nothing new to say on mental illness. It's all just caricatures of mental illness, which is fundamentally just wrong. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that later. But that's the kind of the public's take, and a lot, like Vox is in their point of view. A number of the op-eds you read in Vox is that this is just a caricature of mental illness and race and class relations and this and that. And I don't know who's got the caricatured point of view on these things, to be honest. I don't know who's.
Well, so when you were mentioning that, Corey, it reminded me of a crucial plot point in the movie, which is how, like you were saying, you have this this kind of movement depicted in the movie of people dressing up as clowns or wearing clown masks that were inspired by a couple of things. One is Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's father, who has a role in this story, calling people who were not taking responsibility for their lives clowns. But he also acknowledges that he wants to make the city better and do things for people to make their lives easier. So there is this response, this angry response to Thomas Wayne's statement about clowns that kind of creates this movement. And then there's also Arthur Fleck's killing of 3 Wall Street types who, as the media covers it in the story, were killed by a clown. So they're also inspired by this image of vengeance towards the so-called 1% and the rich.
hold on to that
through
point.
this
Yeah, hold on
murder?
to that point for a sec. I want to just clarify some of the plot points. So in the movie, it starts out and you get they establish that in Gotham City there's been like this garbage strike, so garbage is piling up on the streets. You get the impression that it's a very tense time socially. There's some resentment and like almost class conflict issues going on. It's kind of a powder keg situation. So then what happens is that Joker or Arthur Fleck, having had a few, like he's gotten beaten up already once on the job, and then a couple bad things have happened so far, and he's on the subway where he has this encounter with these three Wall Street types, and they end up again beating him up, like because he has this condition where he laughs uncontrollably. And so he starts laughing at them and their interaction with this woman who's on the subway too. That's a whole other thing. Maybe remind me to get back to that point later on, the woman on the subway. So they start attacking him. They've got him on the ground. They're kicking him, like happened in the first scene where these teenagers are kicking him and like beating him up in an alley. And at this point, he's gotten a gun. One of his coworkers has given him this pistol. And so he shoots two of the guys on the subway. He shoots one in the head, shoots another in the chest a couple times, and then he pursues the third guy out of the train and shoots him in the back, basically kills him in cold blood. So these three murders are then what prompt the reaction from Thomas Wayne, who's running for mayor, to say, like, oh, this was such a cowardly act because this guy wearing a mask, that's the fake news. The media had said that he was wearing a mask. He wasn't. He was wearing face paint. But this guy in a mask was a coward. He couldn't even show his real face, and it just shows the resentment that this poor person, because it must have been a poor person killing these rich people, must have had for the people who have made something of their lives. And so he says, well, as long as like the less fortunate have attitudes like this and behave in such cowardly ways, then the rich are going to see them essentially as clowns. We're going to keep seeing you as clowns. So then in reaction to Wayne's statement, the people, which are basically like this incipient Occupy movement, then adopt the clown as a mask. They're saying, oh, well, you're calling us clowns? Well, we're clowns, here we are. And so they all wear these clown masks at all these demonstrations. And so the news media plays this big role by, first of all, framing the murders in this class warfare sense, when actually it started out basically as self-defense and had nothing to do with the fact that these guys were rich. It was this kind of chance encounter.
Except for that rich people are jerks.
Right, except for that rich people are jerks, according to Arthur Fleck, too. So that's how the media is framing it. And they've got his scary clown face on the front page of the newspapers. And talking about, headlines like "Kill the Rich," because now the protesters are bringing this class warfare element into it, or this class conflict into it, as this battle between the rich and the poor. And so this whole climate is brewing, and in part is sparked by this basically random murder of these three guys on the subway that this clown happened to have perpetrated. So that's the kind of setup for this clown movement.
Yeah, thanks for fleshing that out. There were parts of that I didn't get in the correct order, clearly. The main point I wanted to make on that was that Arthur Fleck says to individuals, cops investigating and to others, that he's not political, and he really isn't. So another statement of the film in the clowns kind of following in the people dressing up or wearing the mask of the clown and following Fleck in a way, is that these movements, this is the message here, can be steered by, influenced by, inspired by people who behave psychopathically. And I think that's a very strong message, even if it's not spelled out in the way that other things, other films, other books might spell it out. That there is this that the kind of downtrodden who we've come to sympathize with and see as the protagonists and want to see win and beat the oppressors in the end are in fact being led or inspired by and reacting to a crazy man. So there is that element too, I think, that has to feel deeply uncomfortable for anyone who has a kind of a leaning towards economic social justice in the way that some people do. And this isn't an indictment of protests and of calling out inequality when it's ridiculous, but it is a statement of how some of these works, how some of these things work, and harkens back to a lot of our discussions on forces of ponerization, spellbinders, individuals who can, by their charisma, lead large groups of people astray. So that was some of the thoughts I had on how and why this movie might make a lot of people uncomfortable.
Well, just the character himself makes you uncomfortable. Good God, I'd never want to watch it again. That was one thing I agreed with a lot of these reviewers. I was like, the only thing I really agreed with them, and I was like, well, I don't want to watch that again. I was like, yeah, me either. I mean, I liked the movie and I enjoyed it quite a bit, but the aura, everything about all the different traits, the character traits that Arthur Fleck has, his complete delusional belief that he's going to become a great comedian someday, but he can't tell a joke. I mean, his jokes are just weird stories from his childhood about how his mom loves him and thinks that he needs to bring joy and love to, or was born to bring joy and love to the world. He's really extremely pitiable in a sense, right? So that's where I think you get a lot of people who like to pity people, and like that's what they make their living off of, is pitying people. They see this and it's just an affront because he's so pitiable throughout the entire movie. You pity him for being bullied. You pity him for like really legitimate things that he probably has no control over, like his inability to control his laugh. He just laughs like nuts, like a nutso. And he has a card that he shows people, when he's in a situation that says, sorry, I have a medical condition where I just laugh, please return this card to me. I'm not going to kill you. That's what the card basically is like. I'm just crazy. He has like really legitimate mental health issues. But like deep down inside, he is completely radically, making the wrong decisions just in his life. His personal responsibility is a total wreck. So it's like, sure, he has all these pitiable qualities, but at the same time, he's indulging in his worst traits, in the worst aspects of his nature, and he keeps on indulging his delusions about dating a girl that lives on the same floor as him and his mother. And it's throughout a large chunk of the movie. It kind of seems like they're actually dating, but then there's the reveal that actually it was all in his head, and he ends up in her apartment, and she walks in on him after putting her daughter or her child to sleep and finds him sitting there, like thinking that he belongs there because in his mind he's been dating her, right? And he took her to his first stand-up routine, and in his mind they had this great relationship. He was able to talk and he was savvy and all this stuff. And I think this really touches a nerve with a lot of people too, because this is something that's universal in human nature. Right? It's just, there's this universal tendency to pretend that you're better than you are, and that, you're shocked when you find out that you're not as good a person as you thought you were. And that's just a part of life in general for everybody, but he's continuously indulging in this and ignoring adult responsibilities up to the point that he starts finding himself in situations where he is incapable of reacting in any way that isn't chaotic and violent, because he's just such a mess. He's getting bullied. If normal people, if they're getting bullied, they know how to handle it. You know what I'm saying? Even if you have impediments, if you have handicaps, or people bully you, there's innumerable examples of people who it makes them stronger. They learn to deal with that. It's just a part of reality, and it sucks. It's a horrible part of reality, but it's universal in the human condition. It doesn't really matter. There's always pecking orders of one kind or another. And he, on the other hand, just continues down that road until he's shooting people, killing them. And that's one thing that I liked about the movie, but not quite, was that most of his violence was reactive. It's like, I just don't get the impression that somebody like him, that is as delusional as him, he doesn't engage in more violent crimes before the age that we see him. It just seems to me like that's the only thing I didn't feel was really accurate, or, of the movie as a psychological portrayal, is like somebody this crazy, this dark, this delusional, who's stalking people, who's, doing breaking and entering into their houses and probably sniffing their clothes and all this stuff. This guy is, he's engaging in a lot more nefarious and dark stuff way earlier in his life. I'd say probably in his 20s or something, and by the time we meet him, he's in his 40s, and he's just like, well, I guess, my living with my mom didn't work out the way that I thought.
And the closest thing that you actually have to something like you're talking about was when he was in that alleyway after he had gotten fired, I think. And he was just like beating the crap out of the dumpster. But that is like, it's so benign compared to like the things that he would probably actually be doing prior to going on those killing sprees, that, I agree that it's not quite.
But then in the end, he does end up engaging in, like a blatant murder. So I don't know. That's just nitpicking on my part. But I listen to a lot of true crime, and so I just I like reading it and trying to figure out what those people think and how they evolve as from creepy little monsters into horrifying, real, actual monsters.
My impression was that he was trying to play a much younger man, Joaquin Phoenix, the actor in the role.
That could be. I don't know.
That, or as people were saying about his portrayal, it was a really brave thing, just from a kind of a movie making perspective, for Joaquin Phoenix to choose to play the Joker after such an amazing performance by Heath Ledger. And I think not to get too bogged down in this one point, that the producers probably thought they couldn't do any better than to get a good actor such as Joaquin Phoenix to portray this guy. Be that as it is, I do want to say that this film is in many ways not very original. Even though I think it's an important film and a well-made film. It's really very heavily influenced by a couple of movies made in the 70s and early 80s by Martin Scorsese. The first one being Taxi Driver, which also stars Robert De Niro. And this is also a film about a character's descent into psychosis. Where he seems fairly normal and continuously skirts the edge of normal behavior, and until he reaches this kind of fulmination of full psychosis. The other film that this is heavily influenced by is also about Martin Scorsese. It's called The King of Comedy. That too stars Robert De Niro, and is all about another failed comic who tries to take his failure into his own hands and reacts in a completely criminal way, where you're also asked the question, how kind of sick this individual is. So, as an aside, Martin Scorsese helped in some of the production of this movie, Joker. He also had something to do with casting or helping Robert De Niro or the producers of the film to get Robert De Niro to play a talk show host in Joker. And what's interesting about that is that De Niro plays this kind of fatherly figure that Arthur Fleck looks up to as the kind of epitome of success and good stand-up comedy. The very opposite of his role in King of Comedy. So I mentioned these films because they were the reasons why I didn't want to see Joker. I had seen this kind of nihilistic portrayal of a human being going down the criminal path before, and I didn't feel like it's pretty somber. It's not happy stuff, and it's not entertaining in the way that we sometimes want to be entertained. Having said that, it's so well done. It's so kind of correct, I think, in a lot of its depiction. It's so, if you appreciate Batman comics or the films, it's cinematography and its art direction and its view of Gotham or New York City in the mid 70s is so spot on. It's unbelievable. And I lived in New York City in the mid 70s, and of course I've seen Taxi Driver, and these are kind of bleak visions of the urban landscape that that even though there's nothing new to it, have been so well appropriated for the use of the Joker movie, are so part of his inner landscape that you can't help but admire how well it melds with the storytelling and the character development. And for that reason, I was pleasantly surprised by the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you mentioned right at the top of the show, Ilan, how you didn't want to see it at first, or you had no real interest in seeing it. I was kind of the same way, because the thing I liked about the Joker, the thing I like about the Joker in the comics and in the movies is that he kind of comes out of nowhere. You have no idea what his background is, and when he gives his background, or when you think you know it, chances are it's a lie or a version of the truth, or just a complete fiction. Kind of like in Dark Knight, when the Joker, at various points in the film, gives different explanations for how he got his scars, completely different stories, right? Mm-hmm. But in each one, he's believable, but he's just making up stories. And then I think it's in Killing Joke, the graphic novel, where at the end there's this kind of origin story, but then he says basically that he prefers his history to be multiple choice. And Todd Phillips has quoted that line, in interviews too. So I was initially reticent. I'm like, oh well, a Joker origin movie, it's gonna just be kind of this cheesy, usually the way most movies present, like the descent into criminality, isn't very well done. It's kind of ham-fisted and not really believable. So I wasn't really looking forward to it. I decided to see the movie after all the conversation about it. I'm like, oh well, this actually might be kind of interesting, if nothing else, just to see what all the hype is about. Turns out that I was kind of wrong, because well, on the one hand, I was kind of right in that it presents this image of how someone becomes this criminal. So I was right just by guessing the form of it, the rough form of it. But it's actually really well done, really, really believably done for the most part. And not only that, there is all kinds of ambiguity in the film itself. Right. That perhaps it is a multiple choice answer. This is just one story. And again, Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix have both said this about the film too, that actually, you can probably interpret it any number of ways. And it is at least possible that this entire movie is kind of just a story, just a joke, that this guy at the end of the film, Arthur Fleck, maybe not even Arthur Fleck, is telling to this psychiatrist at the very end of the film. Who knows? But so despite my initial reticence, I was actually really impressed by the film. I think it was great, and I think it was a great performance, a great script, pretty much everything about it. But what I want to talk about is more on the kind of the character development and the journey that Arthur Fleck takes. Because the way I see it, it's kind of like if it's not a hero's journey, it's more of an anti-hero's journey, because the way it starts out and the way that the things that you learn about Arthur Fleck from the very beginning, the way he's presented, and from what you learn about his potential history throughout the course of the film. So you've got this guy like you were describing, Corey, who's really a pathetic individual. Like he inspires pathos. Like he is totally ineffectual. No one likes him. He has no friends. He's alone. He lives with his mother. They have this well, at least emotionally incestuous relationship, as you pointed out, Ilan. Like there's even a hint that they sleep in the same bed. It's not explicitly said, but it's kind of like it's implied that they do. And like he bathes her, like his old mother, and they've got this relationship. He takes care of her, and he's got no girlfriend. He's got a pretty crappy job. But at his job, he's constantly making mistakes. He's constantly getting complaints from the people that he works for that he does, his party clown routine for. He's constantly screwing up. People think he's weird. No one wants to be around him. And that's because he does have all of these mental problems. So it's revealed that he's on like 7 different types of medication. You find out from his childhood he was like neglected and abused as a child. Probably has some severe brain damage. That's probably what's led to the condition of his uncontrollable laughter. He's got personality problems. So not only is he extremely introverted, he's got like probably numerous affective disorders too. He's got like extreme depression, possibly some bipolar elements. He's usually in an extreme depressed state, but he has these fantasies where he experiences almost this. Well, that's the only. At one point in the story, he tells his social worker that he's never felt. He's never felt happy or like a good emotion for his entire life. He's always been basically miserable. But in the film, he does have moments of positive emotion, but those are entirely in his fantasy world. And so here's this guy that has nothing going for him. No one likes him. Everyone thinks he's weird. He's getting beaten up on the street. Like you said, Corey, it's like he has all these reasons to actually, be miserable because he's living out this miserable existence. But so you have like this is where he's starting out from, with not very many positive qualities. Oh, and on top of that, he's got this like despite his kind of complete failure in life, he does have this grandiose picture of himself. Mm-hmm. Like he's like one of those people that are convinced they're great singers when actually they're horrible and can't carry a tune to save their life. That's actually one of the jokes in the movie. He wants to be the successful comedian, and like his mother tells him in like another one of those painful scenes, he's like, "Oh, I'm going to be a comedian or whatever," and she like very seriously says to him, "Well, don't you have to be funny to be a comedian?" Right. And it's just like, oh God, it's like, well, yeah. And from his jokes, actually, his jokes are so bad that they're funny. I actually thought a couple of the jokes were not bad in a deadpan kind of way, but that aside. So here's this guy, and so he's got nothing going for him. So what's the actual journey that he takes? Well, it's almost as if he's totally at the mercy of whatever he encounters like in his life. It's like he has very little free will, but that comes down to like his own, not only his own personality structure, but his own he embraces that almost like that complete victim mentality for his life, and that's what Murray Franklin, is that his name? The Bob De Niro character tells him near the end of the movie, basically, oh, you're just making excuses for yourself. It sounds like that's a lot of self-pity that you've got. Mm-hmm. But along the way, he encounters certain situations. So the first big one is with the Wall Street guys. So his coworker has given him a gun to protect himself, and he ends up shooting these guys. Now, for the first time in his life, he's done something. He's made a difference. And afterwards, like, this was a great scene. Afterwards, like, the way Joaquin Phoenix plays it, like, you can tell he's pumped with adrenaline. He's like shaking. He goes into this like random dirty bathroom to kind of like shake it off, and then he starts this like strangely, oddly beautiful dance routine, in this bathroom, and then like ends like looking in the mirror like this, like almost like this Christ figure. But then the next day or the day after, he's talking to his social worker again, and he tells her. I got a quote here. He says, for my whole life, I didn't know if I even really existed, but I do, and people are starting to notice. And that's after killing these people. So in his mind, well, first of all, that's another, mental problem that he's got, this kind of depersonalization that he might not even exist. Like, he doesn't have a sense of who he is. He doesn't have or like a real personality. There's all kinds of things lacking in his inner worldview or in his inner milieu. Like in his own mind, there are these holes in his mind, and he doesn't have a sense of identity even. But shooting these people, like for the first time, he's been empowered in a sense. And I think that's probably what has inspired partly a lot of the negative press about this movie, is because here's this guy, and the one thing that makes him something is these murders. And as the film progresses, it's like that's what made him notice, and so he starts embracing that aspect of himself. It's like, oh well, that's what gets me noticed, and that's what actually makes me feel something. And so he descends further into like the worst aspects of his personality and comes to embrace them. So whereas in like a hero's journey, you have this kind of this moral growth into something like greater than oneself, and kind of the burning off of the chaff. Am I mixing metaphors? All the burning off the dead wood, separating the wheat from the chaff. Whereas here, it's like all the dead wood is kind of compacted and compressed into this new personality for Arthur Fleck. Something that he can embrace that actually gives him this sense of identity. Mm-hmm. And so the movie does take this progression to, it's almost like this pathological form of self-realization. It's like Arthur Fleck realizes who he is and becomes this monster, this madman, by embracing all the worst parts of himself. So one of the things he tells his mother before he kills her, because he finds out that she's lied to him his entire life. He's adopted. Not only has she lied about that, she's told him that Thomas Wayne is his father. Turns out, according to even this is ambiguous, but for Fleck himself, as far as he knows, that she was lying about that too. That she was delusional herself. She was hospitalized and institutionalized for not only neglecting him, but because she had serious mental problems herself, including narcissism and basically delusions. And so he kills her kind of out of, again, in this reactive aggression, out of the betrayal that he feels from her. And before he kills her, he tells her that his entire life he thought that his life was a tragedy. Again, the self-pity. But now he sees it as a comedy. So the fact that he's always laughing at everything, or uncontrollably, in the situations where he laughs uncontrollably, it's usually something uncomfortable, something that like provokes anxiety in him, some kind of awkward social situation, because he doesn't know how to behave in social situations. So he laughs. So there's a mismatch between the reason he's laughing and the situation that prompts it. But he comes to embrace that laughter as his real laughter. He says, you always told me that my laughter was a condition, that there was something wrong with me, but this is actually who I am. So he has this switch in the way that he sees his life and reality, that no, there's nothing wrong with him actually. this is who he is. And the fact that he laughs at all of these awkward situations, now he can see the humor in them, almost as if he's like retroactively justifying all of those things that he's laughed at. They're actually funny, and he actually does find the tragedy of his life funny, to the point where now it has been a comedy. It is like everything is so bad that it's actually funny, to the point now where he can laugh at the murders that he commits.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that whole laughter thing and how he says it's his true self. The picture that you get of this guy is he was adopted. This is what I don't quite understand. He was adopted, right? Mm-hmm. She adopted him. So the genetics, we don't necessarily know that he has her crazy genes, mm-hmm. but still he was adopted and neglected and abused by her boyfriend, and then raised by this delusional mother and into this incestuous relationship. And he had, clearly didn't have the best genes of his own, although it's kind of unclear. Like you said, it was ambiguous whether or not Thomas Wayne was his father or not, because later on in the movie there's this tiny little reveal on the back of a picture, to his mother of Thomas Wayne. I think it was of Thomas Wayne, that it says signed. TW. Yeah, it says signed TW. I think there's still this kind of ambiguity there that it could be, and I would tend to lean towards it was one of those relationships where he basically, pulled his strings or whatever, and she was crazy and easily, taken advantage of, and he didn't want to have to deal with it.
But the beauty of that picture, Corey, is that it can be, his narrative is so unreliable, and we come to understand that it's so reliable that maybe that picture affirming that he really was the son of Thomas Wayne and he really wasn't adopted was a kind of his own, assuming a history that didn't really happen, that was his choice.
Right,
and I think you can go either way with that.
Yeah, or it could have been the mother who wrote that note on the back.
She wrote it on the back. Yeah, it's ambiguous. But the thing is, he has all of these forces in his life acting against him. He's basically, he's just totally screwed in many ways. And then you have all of the social issues, social pressures, and all this stuff. And you have this guy that's it just looks like he's just set up for failure. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, a lot of this, the one individual all on their own probably can't handle this level of psychosis in the family, internally. The social pressures, because clearly they don't depict Gotham City as the paradise, Garden of Eden. Everyone loves one another, takes care of one another. No, that's he's getting bullied. He's getting stabbed in the back, left and right. He's weak-willed. He's delusional, and he's nuts. You have all of these elements. And his reaction to it is just embrace the chaos, because that's what he is. That's like, be yourself. He's like, he is chaos.
Mm-hmm. It's the only way he knows how to bring happiness into the world. Mm-hmm. The only way he was programmed to or trained to. And that is to go full Joker and don the suit and the makeup and make jokes that only make sense to him. But I wanted to get back to something, and I don't even remember exactly what it was you said, Harrison. But all of this kind of controversy around the film reminded me a bit of our culture's embrace of Darth Vader. Now, several years ago, I noticed that a lot of kids were donning Darth Vader masks, and it became sort of fun and funny to... and maybe who knows, maybe I'm taking this too seriously. I don't know. But I'm going to say it anyway, being a very big fan of Star Wars and even having enjoyed the third film of the last trilogy, the prequel, where Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker turns evil. This is a full-blown tragedy where we see this character turn to the dark side of the Force. And And I thought enough in that film was conveyed to convey that sense of tragedy and how awful it was. And so for me to see a lot of kids in Darth Vader masks kind of, having fun with it in a way, I was like, no. It's terrible. You don't even want to wear the mask. You want to be Luke Skywalker. You want to be Han Solo. And if you really want to have some fun, you can pretend to be a Wookiee, Chewbacca. But in any case, this brings me back to Joker for a moment, because Joker, for all the charisma and the kind of fun, because there is an element of fun in watching Joker, even if you realize he's evil. He should be terrifying, and you should know there should be a gravity to his mental illness. Mm-hmm. There should be a gravity to just how twisted his thinking is, because that's where it all begins with, in all the literature about criminal minds. It's thinking like a criminal. It's having these thought patterns, this kind of dissociated grip on reality, and just a lack of connection to what's life affirming and constructive. Anyway, all of this is in the film, and it's not entertaining, like you were saying, Corey. It's not something you want to see again, necessarily. And that's the kind of you call this the anti-hero's journey, Harrison. This is a kind of an anti-comic book movie mm-hmm. also.
Yeah.
This is coming at it from a completely different angle. That's not entertaining. This is, what is this about now? That's the kind of attitude that this movie has fostered and has gotten everybody's panties up in a bunch among the so-called woke and the media and other folks who are afraid, I think, also to look at psychological reality mm-hmm. Among some people square in the face. So, in that respect, that's why this movie also has a lot of value, I would say.
Yeah, it's not really entertaining. I didn't find it very entertaining, but it was very educational.
Well, you said some really good things there, Ilan. The thing about it being an anti-comic book movie, I think that one of the reasons for the negative feedback, even though it's vastly popular, like it's breaking box office records, tons of people are seeing this movie. Like it's got like an 8.9 rating on IMDb. Like the audience is actually liking this movie. They're getting something out of it, even if the critics aren't so much. One of the reasons for this is that it's not what it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be a supervillain movie. It's not supposed to be a gritty look at reality, essentially, is what it is. Like, it's not supposed to be realistic. It's supposed to be larger than life. This is actually as close to real life as you can get in a lot of ways. That we have, like, the superheroes are supposed to be comic book characters. They're supposed to be caricatures. And so when you see a villain, it might be, like, even Thanos, he's a great villain, he's well depicted, he's got like understandable motivations, but when it comes down to it, he's just some big purple guy, like that people can look at as a comic book character. He's just a comic book character, and so, but this works on multiple levels. It's not only tearing down, like you go into the film with the expectation of it being a comic book movie, and very quickly get disabused of that notion. But it applies in other ways too. You use the word charisma. And you mentioned, like, when we see the Joker, when we read about the Joker, we are entertained to a degree. He's an interesting character. We can even like with the Darth Vader example, a lot of people can idolize him in a sense, even if it's a kind of like negative idolization, as something like, I don't actually like the Joker, but he's a great character and I like him, right? Because that's how you are with comic book characters, or with any kind of superhero or supervillain, whether in mythology or real life, or comic books or whatever, or movies. But when you present this and present when you present that what's the word, that genre, that trope, when you present that idea of what it should be, and then you subvert it and like take it in a different direction, that becomes uncomfortable, because it's like, oh well, wait a second, I actually have some kind of like romanticized image of criminals. Well, when I said it works on multiple levels, you can look at it in terms of fiction, like liking supervillains or superheroes, and they're kind of like these heroes in your mind, whatever. But it works the same in real life when we idolize heroes or we idolize villains in real life. Like there are people who have this like great respect for the mob, for instance, who love reading true crime books about the mob and the mafia. And it's like, oh, this guy was great. And oh, look what they did. And they took over this city here. And it's like, there's an admiration for the more seedy elements of life. And even in the people who are obsessed with true crime, it's like, you're not reading that because it just terrifies you. You get something out of it. Like there's something interesting and intriguing about it and enticing about it. It's titillating in a way. That's the way these things work. But what this movie does is it gives you the logical progression of analyzing that, like those tendencies you have to project those kinds of things onto reality.
I would just say, there are a couple of scenes when after Fleck he just comes into fruition. He's come out of this kind of cocoon, and he's become Joker. He's embraced it fully, and he starts. There are a couple of sequences where he's the agent of chaos. He's become chaos, and he does it, and he wreaks chaos and violence and destruction with seemingly very little effort, considering how bad it becomes. And there's almost, thinking about it a little bit, there isn't the wow, look at how messed up that was. It wasn't that. It was like, what have you done? This is really, you're sick. What have you just done? Type thing, and that's the feeling. It's like a I mean, it's so well done. It's so well directed and constructed that for a while, if you're a film buff, if you love movies, there's, at least with me, it's like, oh wow, that was just artful. At least compared to 90% of the stuff that we're exposed to these days. But having really looked at it, I was like, and thinking about it now, it's like, there's almost a because there is that that empathy you mentioned before, Corey, at least early on in the film, and then you're like, if you feel any kind of care for the character, it's like that's awful. But while you're watching it, you're still kind of you're still involved with the film. You're anxious to see what happens next. But there is that element of that, and that's what gives this movie the gravity that it has. You never for a moment don't think that this guy isn't a sick puppy, especially towards the end.
Yeah.
And there are nuances in Phoenix's acting that drive it home.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I want to mention that a bit. Just a few of those performances, because like we've mentioned repeatedly, Arthur Fleck is this pathetic character. He's got nothing going for him. But like I mentioned before, in his mind, he's got this grandiose image of himself. And you can see that in his normal interactions with people, he's totally ineffectual. But in his fantasies, he's suave. Sometimes he's a bit awkward, like in his first fantasy with Murray Franklin, and he's just kind of like this innocent, like little kid almost. Oh, my mother always told me that my job or my purpose in life was to bring joy and laughter into the world. And he's smiling, and it's really cheesy, and like that's kind of like the emotional level he's on, I guess, in his mind. But when he, like after after he does something. I can't remember if he kills someone or whatever, but he goes back to his apartment. He throws his bag, and he's just walking like a total alpha. And he goes he opens the door to his imaginary girlfriend's apartment, and just kisses her, and she embraces him. And he's a man in his fantasy, in his mind, right? He's effectual. He's a man of action, and in his mind, he's actually pretty cool. But in his real life, he's not. And that as that progresses. Again, it's really not clear what's real and what's fantasy, but as it progresses, there are a few shots of him where he embraces this grandiose vision of himself. And those are the images where you say, I'm looking at the Joker now. And like the scene where he's walking out of the subway, and it's slow motion, he's walking, he's smoking, and he's strutting. And he looks amazing, right? And like it's one of those moments, it's one of those kind of superhero moments, right? That you get when like in a Marvel movie or whatever, where all the superheroes are all expertly posed doing their superhero thing, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. They look great. Well, this is this Joker moment where it's like, wow, that guy really looks cool. That's a really cool supervillain. But the thing is that while watching that and seeing that, and like seeing his presence and his confidence in that moment, it's immediately contextualized, like you were saying, Ilan. It's like, well, it's just really awkward because he's just done something completely horrible, that you don't see in that way in superhero movies. Like you might see something that's like, oh, well, that was a really mean thing that supervillain did, right? So now the hero is going to have to bring justice into the world and get him. No, it's like here's this really sick individual who's done something,
right,
and now look at this grandiose self-image that he has of himself, where
yes,
he's seeing himself as this god. And the movie itself, like the filmmakers, they structure those scenes in such a way that just kind of like completely pull the rug out from underneath him. Like there's the one scene, it's the stairway scene. So, first I want to get this image of the first stairs up on the screen there. So here's Joker. He's just done something. I can't remember if he's just killed his coworker, the guy that gave him the gun. He's killed. This is the violent scene in the movie. He's killed him, and now he's on his way to go on to Murray Franklin's live talk show, like The Tonight Show or whatever, something like that. So this is his moment of like triumph, where he's dancing down the stairs. There's music going. He's like embraced this grandiose image of himself, and it looks really cool, right? He's dancing down the stairs. There's some slow motion, and then right at the end, he's nearing the end. There's these two police detectives that have been looking for him because they suspect that he's the guy that has killed these Wall Street guys. They're up and they're just looking at him like, what the hell? Like shaking their heads. They call down to him and he's like, ah! And he like freaks out and starts running away. Like that's the real Arthur Fleck. It's like there's no grandiosity there. He's on the run from these cops. He's not going to get very far. He probably couldn't. He can't escape the long arm of the law for long, because he's not a supervillain. He is a pathetic human being who has this image of himself as a supervillain, or at least not specifically, not explicitly as a supervillain, but the grandiose image that he has of himself is what the viewers see as the supervillain. So it's really it's tearing down the image of the supervillain. It's like there's nothing to be entertained about in comic book villains. When if those were actually real people, you would look at them and they would just be common criminals. Maybe prolific common criminals, but when you actually see interviews with like serial killers and stuff, they're just like, well, the serial killers at least, they're just scum. Like there's nothing to them. They have no personality. They're just like killing machines. There's nothing redeemable about them whatsoever. Right. They're just hollowed out shells of human beings that get off on carnage and killing and destruction and chaos. Well, that's not exactly how Arthur Fleck is presented as a character. He's a bit more nuanced and like of a different breed than that, but the same thing is going on there. Now with those images of the stairs, one thing that just stood out to me, I don't know if it was intentional or not, go to the second image again. Like if you look at this image of the stairs, the way they shoot the stairs, like it's up at an angle. Now, the way those stairs are, the stairs that they found, like the railing, it's like if you weren't to see Arthur Fleck there or like the light post, you wouldn't know really if you're looking down the stairs or up the stairs. Now, that was really interesting for me because in the first scenes, like whenever you see those stairs, it's Arthur after a long day of work where something horrible has happened to him, just like trudging up the stairs to go back home. So usually in movies, like an ascent like rising into something greater. In this sense, it's like he's rising up into hell, essentially. His life is a hell, and he's rising up into hell. So there's this kind of like inversion going on with the symbolism there. But at the same time, when you look at it, it almost looks like he's walking down into whatever's up there. Like it's if you just squint your eyes, it's hard to tell what's up and what's down. But then that scene where he's coming down is the first one where he is coming down the stairs, and that is when he's got the makeup on, he's embraced his Joker personality. So now the directions have been inverted. His ascent into his self-realization, his anti-hero, is actually a descent. Now he's triumphantly coming down the stairs. And I just thought that was an interesting inversion of the symbolism, because he's not on a hero's journey. He's not becoming something greater than himself. He's becoming something even less than what he was before. And he is triumphantly descending into the depths of hell. And after that, he gets chased by the cops. Evades the cops, laughs about it because he's gotten away, and these cops end up getting beaten up on the subway. He's responsible for another killing, this one accidental on the subway, because the cops, two cops getting on a train full of these protesters, these clown protesters. Tension and emotion is already high, and they're one of these guys is pointing his gun trying to get at Arthur Fleck. And of course, gets in an altercation with one of the guys on the train and shoots him. So this guy dies. Arthur Fleck gets away, manages to get on the show. Now this is kind of, there have been these mini climaxes in the film so far. This is the big one, where he's on Murray Franklin's show. His kind of childhood hero, his surrogate father figure that he fantasizes will love him. Right. What Murray Franklin has done has, a week beforehand in time, he has played footage of Arthur's failed stand-up routine at this club that he's done, where he just completely bombed, right? He gets up there and just for the first, what seems like 10 minutes, but it's really probably only a minute or two, is just uncontrollably laughing because he's very nervous. So he just gets up on stage and starts laughing. It's very awkward to watch. Then he tells a few bad jokes and it kind of fades out. So Murray Franklin plays a couple of these jokes on the show, as a bit of a funny routine. Oh, look at how bad this guy is. Look how bad he bombed. But then apparently the show gets a good audience reaction, so they invite him to actually come on as a guest. So this is where he's on. This is where he's going after coming down the stairs. And he's got his whole thing planned. Again, in a very awkward scene. One of the two scenes kind of reminiscent of Taxi Driver, where he's kind of practicing in his apartment. He's kind of practicing how he's going to come on, practicing looking smooth, and he knows what he's doing, and getting all the moves right. Another awkward scene. He's planned it all out, and then it hints that he's going to kill himself on air. He's got this knock-knock joke that he's going to tell, and then he puts the gun and he pulls the trigger. So the implication is, okay, he's going to kill himself on air. And there are a couple things that hint towards that. First, he's rehearsing, and then once he's in the green room, he does it again, as if okay, readying himself for it. Now he comes out on stage, and again, this was another one of those kind of great grandiose scenes where they're preparing to bring him on out, and so he's behind the curtains, and he just starts striking a pose, getting ready, and starts doing a little bit of a dance. And then when the curtains open, he comes out dancing, and he looks pretty good. He looks confident, he knows what he's doing. He flicks his cigarette, gives the Dr. Ruth stand-in a big kiss. Very, she's not too happy about that, but it's it shows his confidence and his again is like alphaness, sits down and then has this conversation with Murray. Tells a couple jokes. One really bad, again, like an awkward, bad joke, like a knock-knock joke that just totally falls flat because it's just disturbing, really. And so the doctor figure says, "Oh, you can't joke about things like that. That's totally inappropriate." And Murray tells him off and says, "Oh yeah, we can. This is a family show. You can't tell jokes like that." And then Murray and Arthur get in a bit of back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when Joker now, because he asks to be called out, to be brought out as Joker. Oh, this is how they established that. Like on the show, Murray Franklin had said before showing one of the clips, "Okay, well, let's take a look at this Joker." So Arthur requests Murray to introduce him as Joker beforehand, which he agrees. So by now, so this is where Joker basically tells off Murray and says, "Oh, like you just showed my clips. Well, I'm angry at you because you played my clips just to make fun of me." And
beforehand, Murray was trying to put himself into not the same category of person, like trying to present himself as a good, decent human being. Like, yeah, there's some bad people in the world, but not everybody's bad. You know,
yeah.
I'm a good person too.
Yeah.
And that's when Joker's like, "Really? You're a good person?
Yeah.
You showed my clip just to make fun of me."
Right. And before that, this is the important part that I missed. Right on air, he says he comes out as the guy that killed these 3 Wall Street guys. He says, "Yeah, I'm the guy that did that." And so now it's live TV. It's an awkward situation. Murray's producer is telling him to cut the show, but Murray decides, no, I'm going to go with this. So they have this conversation, and then that leads to, like you said, Adam, and then leads to him standing up and saying, "You get what you freaking deserve," and shooting Murray Franklin in the head live on TV. Which is like, well, first of all, like that whole scene was just brilliantly, like everything about it was great.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and Joaquin Phoenix's performance and the way he delivered that line, like everything about it was just so like shocking and gut wrenching and like disturbing, but like
Plausible.
Yeah, it was just really well done. But while this is going on, so he shoots him, and then like he gets up and he's kind of like awkwardly looking around, goes around, shoots him again twice, and then kind of like drops the gun and has this awkward little moment where he does a little dance. Like again, it's like very like uncoordinated and awkward looking, but very Joker-esque at the same time. Like, I thought that was a great little twist there. But then he goes into the camera, like right up to it, to deliver Murray Franklin's line, which is "That's life," and gets cut off right at life. But so during these scenes, and afterwards, it's showing all the TV screens of the signal being cut, and then the news programs talking about the live on air murder of Murray Franklin, and then showing recaps of the footage. And during those scenes, and then previously during that whole scene on set, there are these images of the kind of like the, what do you call them, the monitors of what's being shown on TV. So you've got the film itself that you're watching, which is a very realistic kind of view camera onto the scene, and then these like almost low resolution TV images of the action. And every time it cuts to those scenes of the TV action, it's like it was, for me, it was really jarring because it kind of takes you out of the immersion that you have in the film experience and shows it as if you were seeing it on TV. And so what you see as if you're seeing it on TV is just this supervillain. You're seeing the Joker then. You're seeing like the comic book character and him like looking really like this clown character on TV, and so for me it was like that in my mind it made it really clear the distinction between the supervillain, the comic book character, the comic book hero or villain, and then the reality. So you're seeing like the comic book image, the romanticized, idealized, like charismatic supervillain. And then when you see, like, it goes back to just regular film that you're watching, you're seeing Arthur Fleck, and you're seeing this disturbed individual, knowing everything that you know about him, and knowing that he's just this, like, really sick, pathetic individual who's completely immersed in self-pity.
Bingo.
there's nothing charismatic or romantic about him. He's just a really sick person who's doing this murder, and then you get those little TV shots, and there's Joker, there's the supervillain, there's the revolutionary hero, or there's your mob idol that you have, if you or the serial killer that you read all the books about. It's like there's the idealized image of him that you're coming to see the movie for. Like you're coming to see the Joker. You're coming to see this comic book character
as a finished product.
And what you get is the reality beneath that.
Yes.
That false image, that surface thin, like grandiose supervillain, and then strip all that down, and what you get is just this wretched human being.
Yeah.
And so that's like it's really affecting. Like it's an emotional experience watching this movie. And well, that's one of the reasons I actually, like, even if there were awkward bits, I actually really enjoyed watching this movie. Well, but then again, that's just me. Like, not everyone will enjoy watching this movie.
How about this, Harrison? How about, and I know this was an area that we wanted to discuss here today a little bit. It's concerning what good art is. And good art, hopefully, reflect something about our culture, something about our psychology, something about our inner life, something about reality in an intrinsic sense that is true. That's what good art is, and perhaps packaged up in this Joker story is actually, for once. Well, maybe not for once. There are some good movies out there, but certainly approaching this story in a truly artful way. Yeah. You've not only gotten a new angle on the Joker character, but you've gotten a new angle on us, on where we are today. Yeah. I mean, this movie it's reverberating. There are so many kind of echoes and reverberations in how people are responding to it, and how the movie is commenting on exactly how people would be commenting on it. It's just it's a kind of a mirror to where we are today, and how we're entertained and how we're not entertained, and what the purpose of good art is, which is not always to be entertaining in the kind of hero's journey sense, as you mentioned earlier, Harrison, which we've seen done to death, and all too often two-dimensionally. So now we have, as you said, this anti-hero journey, which is done on a completely 3D level and in a very uncomfortable way. So. What can we say about this movie as a I don't want to call it a work of art, but as an attempt at art, in as much as a pop culture movie can be art? Well,
I want to read a couple things because I'll just say I think it is art. I would call this movie art, but I'll explain a bit what I mean by that by reading a couple excerpts from. This book. This is The Principles of Art by Robin Collingwood. We've talked about Collingwood before on the show several times. He's one of my favorite writers and philosophers. So he wrote this entire book on what art is and what art isn't. So I just want to read a couple things from it. One at the end, he's talking about, this is in the conclusion, he's talking about kind of how, and at the time he was writing it, 1938, the way he saw it, literature was kind of dying, like the novel was kind of dying around this time. So he's kind of giving, in this first excerpt, a kind of what he thinks might be done about that. So he says, in the case of literature, the only way which I can see of establishing such contact, this is contact with the audience, is for authors to give up the idea of pure literature, or literature whose interest depends not on its subject matter, but solely on its technical qualities, and write on subjects which people want to read. This does not mean turning away from art proper to amusement or magic, for the kind of subjects about which I am thinking does not consist of subjects chosen for their power of arousing emotion, whether for discharge in the reading itself, or for discharge in the affairs of real life. They are subjects about which people already have emotions, but obscure and confused ones. And in wanting to read about these subjects, they are wanting to raise these emotions to the level of consciousness, to become imaginatively aware of them. So there's actually a lot in that short excerpt relating to his whole argument throughout the book on, what is amusement and what is magic and the purpose of art. So right here he talks about art being like that which raises these obscure emotions that we have, these unexamined, unrealized, specified emotions to the surface, to the surface of consciousness, and thereby becoming aware of them. He says that's actually should be the true purpose of art. So then he gives an example in his time, of kind of what he considers art. So he brings up the example that he gives is T.S. Eliot's *The Wasteland*, the poem that he wrote. And so right at the end, I want to read the second excerpt. This is about the wasteland, and I think it also applies to Joker and kind of similar forms of art. You'll see why as I read it. So he says, the poem depicts a world where the wholesome flowing water of emotion, which alone fertilizes all human activity, has dried up. Passions that once ran so strongly as to threaten the defeat of prudence, the destruction of human individuality, the wreck of men's little ships, are shrunk to nothing. No one gives. No one will risk himself by sympathizing. No one has anything to control. We are imprisoned in ourselves, becalmed in a windless selfishness. The only emotion left is fear, fear of emotion itself, fear of death by drowning in it, fear in a handful of dust. This poem is not in the least amusing, nor is it in the least magical. The reader who expects it to be satire or an entertaining description of vices is as disappointed with it as the reader who expects it to be propaganda or an exhortation to get up and do something. To the annoyance of both parties, it contains no indictments and no proposals. To the amateurs of literature, brought up on the idea of poetry as a genteel amusement, the thing is an affront. To the little neo-Kiplings who think of poetry as an incitement to political virtue, it is even worse. For it describes an evil where no one and nothing is to blame, an evil not curable by shooting capitalists or destroying a social system, a disease which has so eaten into civilization that political remedies are about as useful as poulticing a cancer. To readers who want not amusement or magic, but poetry, and who want to know what poetry can be, if it is to be neither of these things, The Wasteland supplies an answer. And by reflecting on it, we can perhaps detect one more characteristic which art must have, if it is to forego both entertainment value and magical value, and draw a subject matter from its audience themselves. It must be prophetic. The artist must prophesy not in the sense that he foretells things to come, but in the sense that he tells his audience, at the risk of their displeasure, the secrets of their own hearts. His business as an artist is to speak out, to make a clean breast. And what he has to utter is not, as the individualistic theory of art would have us think, his own secrets. As spokesman of his community, the secrets he must utter are theirs. The reason why they need him is that no community altogether knows its own heart. And by failing in this knowledge, a community deceives itself on the one subject concerning which ignorance means death. For the evils which come from that ignorance, the poet as prophet suggests no remedy, because he has already given one. The remedy is the poem itself. Art is the community's medicine for the worst disease of mind, the corruption of consciousness. So those are the final words of the book. And when I first read them, I just thought they were just brilliant.
Yeah, wonderful stuff.
And a lot in there that's applicable to, like I said, not just Joker, but films like it. Not amusing. It's not making this explicit political message for you to then go out in the streets and rally about. No, it's not presenting any solutions, not presenting any grand causes. It's just this thing in itself that through the making of it and the viewing of it, that interaction between the artist and the audience, it expresses certain emotions about certain emotions about things. It's hard to put into words because, like Collingwood says in the book, if you could put it into words, you wouldn't make art about it. Art is for the purpose of expressing something that cannot be put into words. If it could be put into words, you wouldn't need to write the poem. Like the poem gets at the heart of something in a way that just saying it can't. And that's why, like, art can never just be propaganda. It can never just be for rallying people to a political cause. It can never just be for entertainment, because none of those things actually get deep enough into, and like there's a process that goes on in the experience of real art that has nothing to do with either of those things. It's a much more like complex and deep and like affecting process than just going to a movie to be entertained.
Right.
Like going to a movie to be entertained, there isn't an element of that, but it's the element in the movie in Joker of watching those little TV screens or seeing these moments of these moments of grandiosity. It's like here's the entertainment, but no, like that's not what this movie actually is. It's like here this is the darkness in our own hearts. It's like this, and that's like from there, like you can make all kinds of connections that are weren't necessarily intended by the filmmakers. Maybe they had some of it in mind when they made it, but you can then take something like that and apply it. It's like just like The Wasteland. You can make an interpretation of Wasteland and apply it to things in real life and real life events, but that wasn't necessarily intended, but it can be used to such a purpose. So with Joker, some of the ways in which it does that is first by its look at violence and criminality. Now, Corey, you brought up an interesting article to me before we did the show about. Oh, you want to hold up that book, Ilan? So we've talked about this book before, Anatomy of Violence, by Adrian Raine. Well, there's this article in Vanity Fair of Adrian Raine's response to this movie. He said he went to see it just expecting, he was just going because of, I believe, with his nephews, and just for some entertainment value, I guess. He wasn't really a comic book fan or a Batman fan, but he said that the movie, he was actually extremely surprised in a positive way by the film because it is, as he put it, such a great educational tool. I'll read just a bit of the article. He said that what Raine saw on screen stunned him. According to the neurocriminologist, the script authentically traces the way a man could be driven to deeply troubling acts of violence by a combination of genetics, childhood trauma, untreated mental illness, and societal provocation. And he goes on, like using his own expertise, like he's an expert in violence and criminality and psychopathy, and all of the factors that go together to create violence and criminality. So he's actually an expert, and I do recommend reading that book. So he points out like the neglect and malnutrition and physical abuse, all of which are factors that can and do lead to criminality at a later time in life, and so.
Well, let me read
ahead.
one paragraph that was particularly impressive. He said, the film was a surprisingly accurate prediction of the kind of background and circumstances which, when combined together, make a murderer, said Raine, who was already considering integrating Joker into a forthcoming course at the University of Pennsylvania. For 42 years, I've studied the cause of crime and violence. And while watching this film, I thought, wow, what a revelation this was. I needed to buy this movie down the road, make excerpt clips of it to illustrate. It is a great educational tool about the making of the murderer. That threw me, confessed Raine, still surprised by how much he appreciated the film. I talk about all of these factors in the class, and honestly, it's really hard to get a true life story that fits all of these pieces together, let alone a very dramatic and stylized movie that illustrates these factors quite strongly. That was really a revelation. So here you have one of the foremost figures in science and psychology on the subject of psychopathy, kind of affirming what we've been saying all along here, and that is that this film affirms what reality is, even if it's very ugly. And speaking of ugly, I wanted to just get back for a moment to the subject of or to the film Taxi Driver, which I mentioned earlier was I think a very big influence on this movie in a number of different ways. And you might even argue is a little bit of a reworking of Taxi Driver by Martin Scorsese and starring Robert De Niro. I used to carry around this encyclopedia of movies called Leonard Maltin's, movies. It had like thousands of movies, little like one-paragraph descriptions with the number of stars he gave it. And I pretty much read through a lot of it. And one description...
Saw about 90% of them, I guess.
Well, the
Only
good ones.
85.
The ones I'm supposed to see as someone who loves movies, right? But his description of Taxi Driver was, some people think this movie is a great film. We think it's ugly and unredeeming. And I read that and I was like, oh, it was a kind of a punch to the gut, because I admired the movie so much. I admired the art of its depiction of the types of things that you were mentioning as art in the way that Collingwood would describe. I was just reading today that that criticism of the book, that one review of Taxi Driver was the one thing that he got the most flack over for the 25 or 30 years that he was publishing this book. So I wasn't the only person to have a problem with his review of Taxi Driver. What is my point here in relation to the Joker? You said earlier, Harrison, that this movie is incredibly successful. People are coming out to it, maybe expecting this Joker movie, and coming out of it with a completely different understanding of what the filmmakers had in mind, even if it wasn't what they expected. But my point is, I think that the reason why it's so successful is because it may not be the Joker movie that everyone wanted or expected, but the one that everyone deserved, or the one that everyone needed but didn't know they needed to see necessarily. And need is a strong word, and I'll walk that back a little bit. But it's like getting, it's like receiving some kind of, it's like going to a chiropractor, getting an adjustment, and not realizing just how messed up and discombobulated you were, and feeling so good afterward. Mm-hmm. This is an adjustment. This is an adjustment in thinking not only about what the Joker is, but what movies can be, what good art is, what our society looks like nowadays. Because you're not watching this movie separated from all of the controversy. You're not seeing Joker without the ideas, the preconceived notions and warnings of the film, without those warnings in mind. All of this plays a part in this. It's a little bit of a cultural moment right now. If you go on YouTube, you will see a great many people commenting on Joker, precisely because it has struck a nerve and because it's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just touching on the relevance of the movie. There's I think he's an historian of religion, but Walter Burkert, and he's written extensively on ancient Greco-Roman religions. And he devoted a portion of one of his books to the etymology of the word tragedy and where it comes from, trying to trace it back to its earliest usage. And he traced it back and argued pretty persuasively that it comes from the term they used for people who sing like goats during sacrifices. And so that the origin of it was the ecstatic, savage energy that would accompany the murder of a human or an animal during a sacrifice of some sort of a ritual for a god. And when when Arthur Fleck says my life isn't a tragedy anymore, it's a comedy. It's like in some ways he is, he is kind of the sacrificial creature in society, like the bottom, the scum, the unloved, uncared for, in all those pitiable qualities. And he gets, society kind of heaps on him, and they use him, for their entertainment. They pick on him, they mock him. He's always getting bullied because that's just the role that he has allowed himself for whatever reason. Maybe he doesn't have any control over it, and in some way that, like you were saying, it is a testimony to, like both of you were saying, to the sheer complexity of this issue, that yes, everyone is complicit in some way in turning him and creating this insurgency in the city, like Thomas Wayne, when he calls everyone clowns and he just whips everyone up. He's well-meaning, but he just, he throws fuel on the fires. He's not tactful, and there's this huge separation between the haves and the have-nots, and clearly it's a real problem that isn't getting solved whatsoever. And this tragedy, this sacrificial creature, this kind of thing lurking in our psyche, it comes back in a big way and becomes, this giant, goes from being just the scum, to being something like so much more, embodying such a social energy. Because on his own, Arthur Fleck would have been arrested, he would have gone to prison, but in the final scene, it's society that frees him and elevates him. It's everyone who looks up to him and says, this guy is fighting the good fight. It's all of those negative energies, all those savage energies that are in society that have been there for time immemorial. Thousands of years ago, we were murdering people for, to whatever, to the gods, sacrificing them to the gods, sacrificing animals to the gods. And then today, it's those energies are still there, and you see it in the, that eat the rich, kill the rich, sacrifice the rich, sacrifice this, murder, death, destruction, this savage chaos. I think that's a big component.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the film tears the veil off of. I really recommend watching Jonathan Peugeot's video that he did recently on Joker, because he talks about this, how that first sign that Joker's holding on his job, going out of business sale for this business, it says everything must go. And the way Peugeot interprets that is, all of your assumptions must go. Everything you think you know about the world must go. And this movie, as being Joker, is going to tear everything down and leave you exposed and vulnerable and uncomfortable. And he gives some examples of it. One of which is the "Kill the Rich." Again, in the film, it's a slogan. It's on their protest signs. It's a headline. Also in real life, you'll see protests like that often in capitalist countries. Kill the rich. Inequality is too bad. We need to do something about it. One of the ways to do that is to kill the rich, sacrifice the rich, as you're saying. And that's a real sentiment. And it has happened repeatedly throughout history and revolutions, where the rich have been killed, actual class warfare. And not just the rich, of course. But this is one of the uncomfortable aspects of the film, is that there are a lot of people who identify with that sentiment, and who really want to kill the rich. It's an idea in their heads. It's a motivating factor. It's an actual goal in mind. Whether they would actually go through with it or not, it's in their mental landscape. And what the film does is show, well, this is what killing the rich looks like. Killing the rich is the same as killing anyone else. It's like, here's this scene of Arthur Fleck killing the rich in this subway, where he just, out of pure reactivity, shoots some guy in the head, shoots the other guy, and then hunts down the third guy and shoots him in the back. Hunts down this wounded guy. He's already been shot in the leg. He's stumbling away, and he just comes up and takes him out. That is extremely uncomfortable because it is brutal. And so so one of the things the film does, basically, it's like, okay, kill the rich. Well, here's what that looks like. It's like, okay, you want, postmodern deconstruction, not only of literature and everything and texts, but everything about society itself. Well, here's what chaos looks like. Here's what that chaos looks like. And it's like when you have that mirror put up in front of your face and it's like, oh, that's what it really looks like. That makes me uncomfortable. I didn't know that's what it really looked like.
It's like, wait, Antifa killed Bruce Wayne's parents?
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. And there's a sense also in a couple of these scenes where it's basically revenge fantasy. That's another thing about superhero movies. Oftentimes they're centered around vengeance. And it's all often righteous vengeance. The bad guy did something bad. Now the hero is going to come and set things right by getting vengeance. Sometimes it can be well done, and it's a human emotion. It's like there's something like deep and like valid about that aspect of human nature. It's there. It's real. But here's this revenge fantasy, that's grown in the soil of this self-pity and this resentment. It's like, okay, here's what your revenge fantasy looks like when you actually play it out.
Yeah.
Here's what chaos looks like when you unleash it. That's what's inside of yourself when you're feeling these things.
And you mentioned a little earlier that he was rehearsing the scene with Murray Franklin by putting the gun to his own head, and practicing that would be the joke, that he would kill himself on air, possibly. And I think the filmmakers are saying something quite important there too. And that is that the same impetus to create chaos, to get vengeance, is in fact on some level suicidal. And so there's nothing intrinsically good or constructive about the type of violence and chaos that Joker enacts, because it could have just as easily gone the other way. He could have just as easily blown his head off. And there's a scene in Dark Knight which captures that as well, with Joker playing Russian roulette with Harvey Dent in the hospital room, where Joker's quite willing to put the gun to his head with the bullet in the chamber and take a chance that he's going to blow his own brains out just to get Harvey Dent on board. He's taking that risk. He's an agent of chaos. If it doesn't work, that's how much he values life. And so for anybody to not see that about this film, that the intrinsically self-destructive behavior, there's nothing being glorified or made good or valuable about Arthur Fleck's descent. It is suicidal. And in a way, this is also a kind of a secondhand indictment of social justice warriors, in a sense, that taken to a certain level of activism, it may not be suicidal per se, but it certainly isn't constructive.
Well, and it often in history it is suicidal, and again, I don't know if that was the the script writer's intention or not, but I'll get back to that point. This will lead into it. One of the things earlier I said I wanted to talk about the scene on the subway with the girl, because that relates into this too. So the thing that leads up to Arthur killing these 3 Wall Street guys on the subway is that there's this young woman sitting on the subway, and these 3 drunk guys come in and just start, like, in a very cliched way, like a lot of guys are, just start like harassing her, like, don't you want one of my French fries? It's like, they're really good. And just being really rude and, like, acting in a really douchebaggy way. And, the one guy starts throwing fries at her because she's ignoring his advances. And that's when Arthur starts laughing, because they're kind of laughing, and then they turn their attention towards him. So right there, that just made me think, okay, well, in situations like this, you just have to read Twitter for 5 minutes to see, like, the number of people where, like, an encounter like that, like a sexist encounter like that, where it's like, okay, well, like those kind of guys should be castrated or executed or something. And again, just like that with the kill the rich, it's like, well, okay, this is what that looks like.
Right.
Like, do you
Are you
really
still on board?
Yeah, are you still on board? Do you really want to unleash those savage energies? Maybe not. Maybe there are maybe there are more civilized ways to deal with this sort of thing. But no, without looking at those aspects of ourselves which are uncomfortable to look at, then we will be suicidal. The result will be particularly disturbing, more disturbing than watching this movie, for sure. Because, like you mentioned about these revolutionaries, this is the way those revolutionary movements play out and always have played out. There is a deeply held resentment, often because of some justifiable grievance that has occurred, whether it's just something as systemic as wealth inequality, or some kind of historical injustice like a past occupation or war or genocide. There are real things motivating these emotions of resentment and for vengeance. And unanalyzed, they are the motivating factors that give rise to movements like this, revolutionary movements. And like you see in the film, these crowds, they end up engaging in mob behavior, crowd behavior, rioting, and burning stuff on the streets and engaging in just random acts of violence. That really happens. And the whole time they're looking up to this figure. They're elevating Arthur Fleck, Joker, onto the car. The guy that kills Thomas Wayne and his wife in front of Bruce Wayne, they do have that scene in the film, says, copies Joker's line from when he killed Murray Franklin and says, "You get what you frickin' deserve," and shoots them. They've lifted up Joker to the status of this figurehead, this revolutionary leader, when really he, like we've said repeatedly, he's not. He's just a wretched human being that they've projected all of their revolutionary sentiment onto. And oftentimes in real revolutions, it doesn't actually play out that way. The real revolutionary is just as fanatic as the revolutionaries under him. But it's a good representation of what's really going on. That whatever that revolutionary leader is, he's still not what he's pretending to be. Mm-hmm. Because any revolution that goes down that path is suicidal, and you see that
right.
if you look at the look at the Cultural Revolution in China. It's okay, we're going to commit cultural suicide, not a revolution. We're going to destroy the past to create a better new one. And it's it doesn't work like that. You are now an agent of chaos. Whatever false images that you have about yourself, however much you've elevated your intentions and goals and motivations and your self-image, whatever grandiosity you have about yourself and your place in this movement and the movement itself, really you are an agent of chaos and you're bringing destruction into the world,
yes.
Not creativity, not anything better, not anything good.
The ends don't justify the means. And what happens is, quite often, the results are far worse than what existed prior to the revolution. So good points there, and maybe that's a good place to leave it this week. We hope you enjoyed the show. Who knows? Maybe we'll review other films in the future. It would be nice if there were films and shows that were as relevant and good as Joker is. And thanks for listening, everybody. We encourage you to see the movie. If you disagree with anything, please feel free to chime in on the YouTube channel. Hit smash and like. Quite famously, that's going to be my new hit smash like. Hit smash like. And thanks very much, guys. These were good comments today.